Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. These are our headlines this evening. Senegal's ruling coalition has lost its parliamentary majority by just one seat. We'll get all the latest on those results from last Sunday's vote from France 24's Sam Bradpeace in Dakar. At least 29 people were killed in Madagascar after local bandits set homes on fire about 75 kilometres north of the capital. The violence carried out by Dahalo, or organised criminal gangs, was likely a revenge attack. More on that coming up. And we'll take a look at women's rugby in Cameroon, which is slowly growing in popularity while players push back against prejudice. Thanks for watching. Now, we'll be crossing to Dakar a little later in the bulletin to bring you all the latest on Senegal's election results with Sam Bradpeace standing by. But first to Kenya, where there are just 4 days to go until a general election there on the 9th of August. The two main presidential candidates, William Ruto and Raila Odinga, have intensified their campaigns, which must end on the 6th of August. Viviana Wandera reports from Nairobi on the final days of campaigning.
Now, these allegations come even as the president has intensified his campaigns in different parts of the country for former opposition leader Raila Odinga. Now, the deputy president also alleged that the president is fully aware of plans to disrupt the August 9th elections. Now, the deputy president also accused Raila Odinga's party, Azimio la Umoja, of knowing that they have already lost the elections, which is why they're going around the country and inciting people to cause violence. Here's what the deputy president had to say.
We are concerned about meetings that are being organized in dark places to orchestrate disharmony, to orchestrate conflict. We cannot sit pretty and see the same things that have happened in Kenya happen again.
Now, the deputy president also mentioned a number of politicians who he alleges are involved in inciting people in different parts of the country to cause violence on election day, and said he will use the channels available to them to submit their names to the Electoral Commission so they can take action against them. Now, Ruto also called on Kenya Power, which supplies the country with electricity, to have stable connectivity on that day and said he hopes there won't be any power disruptions. At the same time, he called on the Communication Authority of Kenya's CEO to ensure that there will be stable internet connectivity all over the country so that Kenyans can be in the know on what is happening.
To Madagascar next, where at least 29 people have been burned alive in an attack perpetrated by bandits. Now, the violent scenes took place on the 29th of July in the village of Ambul Tarakel. That's about 75 kilometres north of the capital, Antananarivo. Now, army helicopters were deployed to search for the culprits. 25 suspects have been arrested, 3 of them killed. What was behind this deadly violence? Our correspondents sent us this report.
Ashes, burnt flesh and singed clothes are all that remain from a horrifying night. On July 29th, as the sun was rising, 32 people sought refuge in this house in a doomed attempt to escape the Dahalo, the name given to gangs of bandits terrorizing Madagascar. The attackers torched the house. 29 people were burnt alive, including 15 children. A third of the people in the now abandoned village were killed. Albert saw what happened.
The Dahalo burned that house over there. I was hiding in this house. As soon as the house began burning, they surrounded it so that the people inside could not escape by the window.
The Dahalo came after this man, a 27-year-old father, who managed to escape by jumping out a window. His wife and 4 children died. A few months earlier, his father was shot dead while on his way to the market. This is how Dahalo assert authority on villages they believe are hostile to them, according to him.
It was because my father was close to the leaders. High-ranking people close to the government would be welcomed to my home whenever they came to our village. The Dahalo considered this an affront.
The decimation of villages by violent criminals is becoming a daily reality in many rural zones of Madagascar. Even the police are almost giving up. When Joshua tried to call them, he was ignored. He now counts on amulets as better protection.
When the police shows up, they never manage to catch the Dahalo, who always escape before they arrive. Policemen don't believe me anymore. They think I'm a liar. So I decided to call people who use magic charms in the village.
The president has promised justice, but the Malagasy army has so far failed to bring an end to the massacres. The Dahalo are becoming increasingly powerful, funded with stolen cattle and protected by corrupt authorities. This phenomenon, if not addressed urgently, could push the country towards civil war.
Now, South Sudan has delayed its first election since independence, which will now be pushed back to late 2024. Parties to the peace deal ending South Sudan's devastating civil war decided to extend the transitional period by 2 further years. This is not the first time the election has been delayed. In explaining this latest delay, President Salva Kiir said he wanted to avoid creating conditions for more bloodshed. South Sudan became independent from Sudan back in 2011. Senegal's National Electoral Commission has issued the final results from the country's legislative elections. Macky Sall's ruling coalition has lost its majority by just 1 seat. This means there will be a necessary sharing of power, or cohabitation as it's called in French, for the first time in Senegal's history. Now, for more on all that, we can cross now to Dakar and Sam Bradpeace, who has been following events for us. Good evening, Sam. What does this mean now for the country and how it will be governed going forward? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, what's interesting is that this situation is completely unprecedented. It's never happened before in Senegal that you've had a parliament controlled by the opposition while the executive branch remains controlled by the government. But potentially the consequences could be massive. Macky Sall, the current president, could struggle to push ahead with his legislative agenda if the deputies, the MPs in the National Assembly, don't vote in accordance with the government, which now looks like a very real possibility. Another potentially major consequence is that this electoral result may well have punctured any hopes that the President Macky Sall might have had of running for a third term in 2024, a move that the opposition have always looked at as unconstitutional, controversial at the very least.
So, as you said, there are major upset for Macky Sall and his hopes for a much criticised third term. Tell us about the road to victory for the opposition and how they got to this place of upsetting expectations, I suppose.
Yeah, I've been speaking with Senegalese voters for weeks now, and there is one issue that keeps coming back to me. That's the cost of living. Quite simply, Senegal, like many countries around the world, is experiencing very high inflation at the moment. The IMF predicts that inflation will reach 5.5% at the end of the year, and many people are simply fed up with it. Even if it's not necessarily the government's fault, it's not necessarily a case of economic mismanagement, but people are venting their frustration, perhaps through the polls. That would be my analysis, certainly. Just one thing to mention, though. Macky Sall's governing majority may well be able to convince some opposition MPs to join them, which could, again, drastically change the whole picture here.
OK, Sam, thank you for that update from Dakar. To South Africa next, where homes were set on fire in a township near Johannesburg. Residents of the township of Kagiso, behind the arson attacks, targeted migrants they say are working illegally in local disused mines. Tensions grew last week after a gang rape of 8 women, where a group of miners were accused of being responsible. This is not the first incident of foreign miners being accused by locals of criminality in the area, with poverty driving mistrust between newcomers and local residents. The prize-winning Zimbabwean novelist and filmmaker Tsitsi Dangarembga will face trial next week for staging an anti-government protest in 2020. Dangarembga was charged with breaking COVID-19 lockdown measures to hold an illegal gathering. She had staged a protest criticising the government's efforts to deal with corruption and a struggling economy. There were reports of abductions and torture of activists at the time, which the government has denied. To Cameroon next, and a focus on women's rugby there. For now, there are only 4 clubs in the country and 100 or so players, but there are growing efforts to push back against lingering prejudice. That is one of the reasons the sport remains limited amongst female players. Laurent Berstecker has this report.
Every morning, Alvine Maché leaves the family home and heads straight to the training ground. Since she started playing 4 years ago, the young Cameroonian has been living and breathing rugby.
It's my passion. Even though I haven't been playing for a very long time, I love rugby. I love my sport. I love what I do.
Like many rugby women in Cameroon, Alvine's decision was initially met with skepticism by her family. But she eventually managed to pass on her enthusiasm for the sport, often perceived as too violent for women, even if her mother remains a little worried.
I'm scared when she plays. She comes back with injuries all over and just lies down. And we can't do anything to help her.
Alvine, who plays for one of the country's 4 women's rugby clubs, was recently called up for selection by Cameroon's national team. But the 26-year-old still doesn't earn a salary and can't make a living with rugby. In a country where football is king, the sport remains largely unknown and underdeveloped, especially for women.
It's really interesting to see women doing this job, playing this sport. It's really encouraging because it removes the idea that it's a sport reserved only for boys.
Leading by example, Alvine hopes to encourage other women to pursue their passion, even in fields traditionally reserved for men.
Good luck to them. That brings us to the end of tonight's show. It was produced by Laura Di Basio. Thanks to her and all the team. Thanks to you for watching. Good night.